Hi there, I'm Lori Harrison, and in this segment I'm going to share with you some ideas about motivating and retaining students in online courses. Research tells us that there are a number of barriers that students report with regard to their success in online learning. Here's a list of a number of factors that were identified by a quite well-known research project by Muhlenberg and Berge, and when they came up with this list, which ranged from social interaction, administrative issues with getting access to courses, registration processes, etc. Time and support would indicate the time available in the students' personal lives and support from their family and workplace. Learner motivation, technical problems, access and cost, technical skills, and academic skills. When we look at this list, we notice that two of them, which I've highlighted in red, are things that we as instructors can have an influence on. Most of the other things are external and not factors that we have any control over. However, we can make design decisions that will impact social interaction and learner motivation. So let's make sure we do that. Here's a thought for you. This is a recent post that I read, a blog post from Michelle Pacansky-Brock, and she suggested to start, motivation is not like having a size 8 foot. It's not a fixed trait that some humans either have or don't have, but rather motivation is more like water. Its qualities are impacted by other forces. Water can be serene or glass-like on one day and rough and choppy on the next, depending on factors like the weather or the number and type of boats in use. Motivation is similarly influenced by outside factors. So when we look at motivational theories, and of course there are many, what I find is most useful is rather than looking at descriptive information about why people have particular levels of motivation, instead to try and pursue a more prescriptive approach and think about what can we as instructors change to influence the motivation of our learners and thus retain them in our courses. We certainly don't want them getting discouraged and dropping out partway through a course or a program. In order to think this through, I find it useful to refer to what's called the ARCS model. And you can see in this diagram that there's four main components. The acronym ARCS stands for attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction. This model was first developed by John Keller in 1984, and it was it's been revisited a number of times. A more recent study in 2010 looked at it in relation to web-based learning. So it was originally introduced as a general theory in instructional design, and subsequently it was noted that using strategies that Keller identified, there was an improvement in retention or in less students dropping out of online courses in a study that incorporated hundreds of courses and students in many different institutions. So it was kind of a comprehensive study. So there's quite a lot of evidence to support this particular model. So what do these four attributes entail when we come to thinking through our course design? Let's first look at attention. The types of things that we can use to get the student's attention include, for example, a hook at the beginning of a unit or a lesson, an interesting video, a quote, an image, a fact, something thought-provoking to engage them to get their attention. We also might want to consider using inquiry. Instead of telling students, rather ask them questions. Ask them, why do you think such and such is the case? Or have you ever had, referring to their own experiences. So using questions as a way to get their attention, to provoke their thoughts on a topic. And of course, variability, using different strategies, mixing it up a bit, not always using the same material or strategy, but having a variety can also ensure that students don't fall asleep at the wheel, that we keep mixing it up and keep them engaged. The second one, relevance, we also have a number of strategies we can use to ensure that the content is relevant, that the activities are authentic, and we've talked about this in previous segments, but just to recap, linking the course experience to their present need, whether that's within the course or within their professional context, is quite important. If there are professional linkages, of course, but it can also be supports or activities that help them to succeed in the course that are a present need for the learners. Or a future use, again, the professional linkage, or it could be a future use in the course or a future use in the program if your course is leading to a second course or subsequent activities within the program. And then, of course, tapping their experience, using their examples, making sure that the prior learning experience and professional experiences are brought to bear in the activities. That theme's been repeated again and again, and we know that that's critically important to retention of our students and sustaining their interest. Building confidence is another one, and this might be a little bit more difficult to wrap our heads around. How do we go about building their confidence? One way is to make sure that the learner knows what the requirements are for the course. So having a really good syllabus, a really good roadmap, very explicit information about what the requirements are for the course will make them comfortable that you've designed it carefully, you know where everyone's going, and that they'll be guided by you, and that they won't have any anxiety about trying to figure out what's happening in this course. Focusing on their successes is another strategy. This can be through feedback in video comments or discussion comments or feedback on assignments, but making sure that they are recognized when they have successes and encouraged. Also, the idea of attribution, of attributing those successes to their efforts, of giving positive feedback on seeing where they've improved, how they've progressed, and attributing that to their hard work and their efforts to complete the various activities and assessments in the course. And finally, satisfaction. Some of the satisfaction is intrinsic. Learning, succeeding, being able to do these new things, being able to use their skills and apply them is very satisfying. Giving them recognition, again, potentially in comments or feedback to the group of actually pointing out work that's a good example or work that is useful for others to take a look at, to get ideas. That sort of recognition from an instructor in the form of instructor feedback can be very satisfying for students. So we want to make sure that they feel that we are appreciating their efforts. That can be external, and then there's the intrinsic of they have a sense of accomplishment and that you make that visible to them. So across these, you'll see that choice is an important factor across all these dimensions. Variation, relevance, attribution, letting them choose the activity that's relevant to their experience, and so on. All of these contribute to a sense of self and a sense of accomplishment. So as we move through the course design, initially we'll have articulated learning outcomes, and then in backwards design we'll have moved out to the assessment components, but there's plenty of room in between to add activities and incentives that will encourage the students. And these can occur across a number of domains. It could be instructor encouragement, it could be peer supports that motivate them through community activities, or it could be intrinsic satisfiers, cognitive challenges, and success in their achievement of the outcomes and success in the activities that are provided to them. Now, if you look at these, that might ring a bell, just to harken back to an earlier conceptual foundational piece that we had explored. You'll see that these aspects, the instructor feedback, the peer support, and the cognitive challenge, all play back to our starting point, which was the community of inquiry. There is an abundance of research that shows that building community is the most important thing that we can do to ensure that our learners are engaged and that we retain them in our courses. I'll leave you with one final thought, and that is that we need to be sure that we don't just have a list of content that we're providing. Perhaps the most important takeaway is that we don't just tell our students information and assume that they've learned it. We have to make sure that they're actually engaged in an active learning process, because that's where the learning occurs. And I've provided a comic strip here just to end on a note of humor. The one boy says, "I taught Stripe how to whistle." The other says, "I don't hear him whistling." The first says, "I said I taught him. I didn't say he learned it." So if we want to take a message away from this little comic strip, we need to think carefully about the student learning and ensure that our course designs are learner focused.